In this lesson, we're going to be looking at sustainability, and in particular, the sustainability of resources. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to make a bubble map to define what you think makes a good resource. So think about resources we use for fuels, resources we use for building materials, and what properties would you consider make them good resources. So some things we could consider properties of good resources. First of all, it needs to be easy to obtain, so it needs to be abundant. Preferably, it needs to be affordable. Not necessarily cheap, but definitely affordable. Preferably, it would be renewable, as opposed to being finite. We'd quite like it to be efficient, especially if we're talking about a fuel. We want quite a lot of energy. If it's inefficient, then it wouldn't be a particularly good energy resource. We want to look at the pollution, so we want non-polluting. So low emissions, so perhaps if we're talking about fuels, one that doesn't give off sulfur dioxides that cause acid rain, or minimise the production of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So we've got abundant, affordable, renewable, efficient, non-polluting. What other things could we go for? Recyclable. If we were talking about building materials, for example, we could use recyclable materials. So these are just a number of things that we might be looking at if we were trying to judge whether a resource was sustainable or whether it was good. And I'm sure you've got examples that I haven't included here. So if you just add them to your own bubble map. So here we have some information about the combustion of biodiesel. So I'm not expecting you to have any prior knowledge of biodiesel, but if you read through all of these points of information, you should get an idea about biodiesel and the effects of the production and the combustion of biodiesel. And then what I'd like you to do is on the next page, compare the combustion of diesel from crude oil to the combustion of biodiesel. What do they have in common and what are the differences? So on the next page, a double bubble map comparing the combustion of diesel from crude oil and biodiesel. So to start off with our double bubble map, we're going to look at the similarities between diesel and biodiesel. So they are both fuels. They are both combusted to release energy. They both produce carbon dioxide, water, when combusted. Okay, so in terms of using diesel or biodiesel, you're still going to be polluting the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. However, if we look at some of the key differences, so biodiesel comes from plants, comes from a crop, so it is renewable. So it comes from plants, you could always plant more. Importantly, because it comes from plants, and those plants, the whole time they're plants, are taking in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, that kind of offsets the carbon dioxide that's produced when you combust it. So we describe biodiesel as being carbon neutral, because the carbon dioxide emitted when it is combusted is offset by the carbon dioxide taken in by the plants that are used to create it. Another key advantage of biodiesel is that it's biodegradable. Which means if it is spilled, it can be broken down naturally by bacteria. Let's look at diesel then. So it's not renewable, it's a finite resource. It comes from crude oil. It is not carbon neutral. So the carbon dioxide that's being produced by the combustion of diesel is carbon that was locked underground for millions of years. So it releases locked up carbon. So carbon that's been stored underground for millennia. And it's non-biodegradable. However, there are some disadvantages to biodiesel. For example, it requires large amounts of farmland, which means two things: either that land is not being used for farming crops for food, or perhaps it's a large contributor to deforestation, clearing large areas of the rainforest in order to grow biodiesel crops because they're quite profitable. It produces more nitrogen oxides when you combust biodiesel compared to diesel from crude oil, and the problem there is they contribute to acid rain. So there are many other comparisons you can make. Obviously there was 11 points on the previous page, and you could add all of them to this double bubble map, but these are the key considerations you need to make. So diesel from crude oil is a finite resource. It will run out. It releases locked up carbon, so the carbon dioxide produced when you combust it is carbon that's been locked underground for millions and millions of years. And also it's non-biodegradable. Whereas biodiesel, it is renewable, it comes from plants. It's carbon neutral because the carbon dioxide emitted by the biodiesel is offset by the carbon dioxide taken in by the plants during photosynthesis. It's biodegradable in nature, but it does produce more nitrogen oxides, which contribute to acid rain, and it requires a large amount of land, which can be a contributing factor to deforestation. So the last thing I'd like you to do then is to answer this exam question. Now, this is a very typical kind of exam question you're going to get for this topic. It's an evaluate question. They've given you a table of data. So remember what we were looking at in the last lesson. Make sure that we reference this data. Make sure we also add our own knowledge, and it even tells you to include a supported conclusion. So we need to make sure that we are quoting data from this table, making comparisons, using our own knowledge to supplement that information, and at the end giving a judgment. So going through this question, we're going to use this table to sort of structure our answer. So I'm just going to go through it row by row, making comparisons with the data that's been given. And make sure you quote the data and you compare the values. Don't just say biodiesel emits 3,000 grams of carbon dioxide. Petrol emits 3,000 grams in carbon dioxide. Make a comparative statement, something like biodiesel and petrol both emit 3,000 grams of carbon dioxide. So that's going to be our first point. Biodiesel and petrol diesel both emit 3,000 grams of CO2. And again, we're going to supplement this with our own knowledge. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. The next one, unburnt hydrocarbons. Petrol diesel emits more unburnt hydrocarbons. than biodiesel. And the problem with the unburnt hydrocarbons is they contribute to global dimming. The petrol diesel produces more soot. Than biodiesel, which also contributes to global dimming. Biodiesel produces more nitrogen oxides. Than petrol diesel. So I haven't just gone through and just stated the values, have I? I've made a comparison that they emit the same amount of carbon dioxide, that the petrol produces more unburnt hydrocarbons, that the petrol diesel produces more soot, that the biodiesel produces more nitrogen oxides. And they're a problem because nitrogen oxides cause acid rain. And everything that I've written in blue is our own knowledge that wasn't given to us, or information that wasn't given to us in the table that we have added. And then finally, if we want those 5 marks, we need to make a judgment. So I would say, therefore, biodiesel is the best fuel. Something else we could have said that we haven't is, even though they both emit 3,000 grams of carbon dioxide, what we could also add in is that the biodiesel is actually carbon neutral. So even though they're both giving off 3,000 grams of carbon dioxide, we could make the point that the biodiesel takes in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis as it is formed from plants. So just going across from the table, we've made our comparisons, we've used data from the table. So everything I've written in red is a comparison from the table. Everything I've written in blue is something from our own knowledge that we've added, and we've added a judgment at the end, and you're going to get all 5 marks.